Welcome to the Right Room with Hilary Phelps. Today we are talking to Lara Love Hardin, and Lara is the author of The Many Lives of Mama Love. I was first introduced to Lara's book because my friend Kelly told me that this book read like a fiction, but it gave her an insider view to what addiction was like. I went out that day and bought the book immediately and started reading it, and she's right. Lara puts these beautiful words, she has an MFA, to the painful struggles of an addict and addiction. And it's such an honor to talk to Lara today. She was chosen as one of Oprah's book authors, and we get into a really wonderful conversation full of humor. It's a lot of fun. I hope you like it. Hi, Lara.
Hi, Hilary.
How are you?
I'm good.
We were just chatting a little bit before in the room, and we kept going, and I was like, we better hit record or we're going to have this whole conversation
I
without
know.
actually hitting record.
I know. It's like
Um,
when you meet someone who is already a friend and you're just like, oh, let me update you on my life, even though we have never met before. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I feel that. And I feel that with you. And it's really fun. I'm like, okay, we're going to get an hour into this and never hit. So, welcome to the Right Room. I am truly honored, doesn't even capture how I feel to have this conversation with you right now. And I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons. I've read a lot of books on addiction and recovery, like you, a woman in long-term recovery. So you're 16 years. Is that right?
I was 15 in March, so I can't claim 16
15.
yet.
Okay. I
Yeah.
gave you another year. Okay. And
Thank you.
March 18th is the day after my birthday. So I will never forget the date. Um, and so I've been around for a little bit. And the first page of your book, I burst into tears. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. But everything, I think everything felt like it was speaking to me directly. And I'd heard your book. I've heard about The Many Lives of Mama Love. So Lara is the author of The Many Lives of Mama Love. And one of my friends at a baseball game, I have a 7-year-old, he plays Little League Baseball. And we were talking, and she's telling me, and she's like, I just finished this book. I couldn't put it down. And she said, I would love for your input, Hilary. It's about addiction. She goes, the thing about it is I thought it was fiction. I was reading it and I thought there's no way that anybody could go through this until I got to the end. And she talks about sitting with Oprah, and she said, and then I'm like, wait a second. And she goes, and I went on and I looked and I realized it was nonfiction. She said, so I'd love to get, kind of what you think about that. And I want to read a bit from the first, and then I really want to dive in. But it says, the truth is, I've only ever had one addiction, the white whale of addictions, escape. From as far back as I can remember, there's always been a better place than wherever I am. A better me than whoever I was. And like you, books. And I never thought of it that way. I was a reader, an avid reader when I was little, and would just dive in and read and read and read. I don't even know the question I want to ask you. I'm just so, but talk about that. Talk about where it started, right? Because had never thought about that too, because I looked to escape, and I'd always wanted to be somewhere other than where I was or who I wanted to be. But books like you, I read nonstop when I was little. Talk about that from there. And you also had for anyone that hasn't read the book, your childhood was
Wonderful.
challenging.
No. Perfect. No.
Stepfather's finger. It was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, I wrote my whole childhood in like 2 paragraphs, I think, in that book. I really was trying to so first of all, thank you for resonating with the book. Thank you for your friend at Little League. And a lot of people thought it was fiction. It got in the Book of the Month Club at launch date a year ago, which is normally fiction. And so a lot of people who don't typically read nonfiction or read memoir that's not a celebrity memoir, it snuck in there. And so a lot of, which I'm grateful for because it got in the Bookstagram world and it got a lot of exposure. But I think for me, I didn't realize addiction was escape until rear view mirroring it, kind of. and writing it down. And, for me, I did turn to books. My home life as a child was confusing, and it was both chaotic and very silent, if that makes sense. Like, it was chaos and no one was talking about it or acknowledging it, which is like it's a weird thing to live in, and so I turned to books and I started reading really early, and I read desperately. So, and I don't, a lot of my childhood is kind of fuzzy, blocked out. I don't remember certain things. Um, but, I remember kind of being in my little slanted alcove closet, and I would just be in there curled up and just reading and reading. And it was kind of my refuge from the confusion around me. And there's a lot of, my sister was a severe alcoholic as a teenager, and ended up she died in a drunk driving crash as a passenger when I was 19. My brother was a heroin addict, and no one told me until college. I just knew he stayed in the basement, listened to Led Zeppelin, and was grumpy.
Yeah.
And so, it was really like chaos until the police came and something had happened, and then chaos and then silence. And so I felt very much alone most of my childhood, maybe a good part of my life. So books were my refuge. They were my escape, totally healthy escape, right?
Right. Right.
And then, books, as I say in my book, are a gateway drug to writing. And I started writing stories really early on. And that was really how I kind of made sense of my internal world and my emotional life and what was going on around me. And then I stopped writing after I had children for a long time.
Yes. Do you feel like, because I resonate a lot with what you're saying, kind of that there's chaos going around you to a different extent, right? But it's kind of that ostrich in the sand. Like if we don't talk about it or acknowledge it, it's not here. There's nothing to see. So we're just going to pretend like it's not happening. And for me, I always wanted connection. And again, like you're talking about hindsight,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to feel like I connected with someone, like, or had a tight bond. And I found that I didn't know how to do it. And so that's when I turned to drugs and alcohol as the next level of, I don't know, trying to check in with someone or trying to check out of myself or something. How does that, I mean, is that kind of the same story for you?
Yeah, I like to say I was a late bloomer and an overachiever, right? In that
Yes.
area,
Same. Yeah.
right? So
Oh, I love that. Oh, addiction. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm gonna go hard, whatever
Girl,
I do.
you
I'm gonna
did.
go hard.
You you
Mm.
you went all
Yeah,
in.
I have no criminal record and I'm gonna get 32 felonies. Let's go, because I'm gonna win. So I really thought I could outrun my family and the addiction,
Okay. Yeah.
and the chaos, and I could out educate myself for it. So I started working at
Mm.
14, you know, went to college 3,000 miles away from home. I grew up on the East Coast. I went to college in California, worked lots of jobs, and UCSC is a very party school, and there was lots of drugs there. And I like experimented and did stuff, but I was working and I was paying for college, and I was like achieving. And then I went straight from college to graduate school to get my MFA in writing, and still kind of outrunning everything. And it was really only, you know, uh, maybe 4 years after graduate school. I had 3 boys in 4.5 years. I was married to someone who was cheating on me, and my sort of quest for this, I was going to create this family I didn't have, my happily ever after family. And when I realized finally that's not going to be the thing, that is the first time I took a opiate, a pain pill that was prescribed to me for emotional pain.
Okay.
Right.
How did
And
that work?
it worked wonderfully, because what it did was it helped
Yeah.
me do what I had learned as a child, which is pretend everything's okay when it isn't. Right. And
Yes.
so I needed that. That was the thing. And I felt like it gave me what you're saying, what I wanted. I got to spend some time with Gabor Mate at this retreat for work. And he said, Lara, what were you looking for? And he's the expert on addiction, in my opinion. But he's like, what were you looking for when you took those opiates? And I was like, connection,
Yeah.
like what you're describing. And so that feeling, when I took it, the way it lit up in my brain and worked in my brain, and opiates work in my brain, is like, I'm smarter. I'm funnier. I can look you in the eye and talk to you and not be terrified. I can feel like I belong. I can be comfortable in my own skin. Like and I can pretend that everything's fine when it isn't. So it was like a buffer. It was escape, but also like a reality filter, I guess,
Yeah.
you know.
Because I think, oh, go ahead. I was gonna say,
And
as humans, we all want that connection and love, right? And if we
yeah,
can't get it on our own, like we turn to things like
yeah,
opioids
yeah,
or
yeah.
drinking.
Or
And
drinking. And I think, I think that I knew, I swear I was not going to be like my family. I was not going to be addicted. I was to anything. And, I wrote in the book, I think I wrote it, but it was just like, you can't outrun yourself. Like I tried to move away and reinvent myself. And now I'm this perfect mom. And okay, maybe I'm not so happy just spending my days folding laundry and playing army guys, but I love my children. And I don't know, like I had no other tools.
yeah,
And this was the mid 90s, and people were doctors, dentists, everywhere you went, like Vicodin specifically was handed out as sample packs, little bubble wraps. They had a dish on the dentist's office. Seriously, a
like mints.
dish. Yeah,
As you
like
leave.
mints,
Yeah.
like try this, because the drug reps were
Wow.
pushing it. It was before
Yeah.
the opiate crisis was really a
Right.
crisis. And, it was like you were in a mood. They're like, here, let me prescribe this. You have an earache, whatever it is. And so, I think it took a long time for me to like sort of forgive myself for becoming addicted to opiates, because, but then I thought about that. I was like, they were everywhere, every childbirth, they're prescribed everything. And unfortunately, it was just the way it reacted with me. Like it made everything okay for me. And then one took two, and two took three, and three took four. And then I was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. I'll stop for a week. And I'll be like, oh, I could stop. It's no problem. Then I'd start again. That sort of reverse psychology. And it's interesting. I didn't write about this, and I'm just thinking about this now, but every time I would quit, my mantra would be choose life, choose life, choose life. Because I knew, like, I had this little mantra in my head, like, choose real life. And so it was always this battle in me. Like, I was aware that I was falling into this, and it was not who I wanted to be or who I was. And I didn't have any other tools. And never would I tell anyone I needed help.
And you talk about that in the book when you say using drugs. I had it highlighted as one of the things. I'm paraphrasing, but using drugs brought me joy, and until there was something else that brought me joy, I was not going to give up the drugs.
Right.
And that goes to the point of like the tools. And I think you're right. Like women, men, I mean, everybody in recovery, like that is our tool for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness, sadness, grief, joy, pleasure, like whatever it is. And so, when you and you also say in here, which is also really powerful, in your book, something that stuck out was about your boys. And you're like, I would run in front of a bus for my boys, but I couldn't stop using drugs for them.
Mm-hmm.
Can
And I
you
think
talk
that
to that a little bit?
it's so hard for people to reconcile.
Yeah.
Even my editor
Yeah.
at Simon Schuster, he was like, well, did you love drugs more than your children? I was like, no.
Yeah.
But like, but you can hold both things. Both things can be true. And I think that's really
Yeah.
hard for people to understand unless you've been in it, because it feels like your very survival depends on them. Like survival, like you will die if you don't have this substance. It's very insidious, the compulsion and the like way it just takes you over. And the way I became, just a prisoner to it. It's interesting. I think what it gave me was bravery. Like it gave me bravery.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it in those terms till right now, but really it made me so brave in all the ways that I wanted to be brave in the world.
I
And
think
yeah.
yeah, it made me show up as who I thought I wanted to be. But then when I tried to reconcile who I thought I wanted to be with versus who I really was or am on the inside, that's where the kind of disconnect for me
Yeah.
came.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that like lack of, I don't know, self-awareness and self-love, I think.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think looking back, I think I might have been, I know I was depressed, I'd had 3 children, 4.5 years. And, now there's a lot of conversation about postpartum depression. Like I wouldn't have known, but looking back, I'm like, oh, was that, like I know I was self-medicating out of, the unhappiness and sort of failure and falling apart of my marriage. But I do wonder, again, it doesn't matter because I never would have told anyone even if I'd known I was depressed then or asked for help. I never would have said a word.
And there's this, and that reminds me of, I have a bunch of this, and I want to read this part too from your book, because this is what, and I'd love to talk more about this and get your thought on it then and kind of versus now. But you talk about being the perfect mom, right? And perfect moms don't go to rehab. Perfect moms don't have addiction, right? And one of the things that I talk about is that idea of, as women, we continuously want to show up and say yes. I will say yes to the PTA. I will say yes to my partner. I will say yes to work. I will say yes to my children because I don't want to let anybody down. And then at the end of the day, if you think of it as like a tally sheet, we are the ones that are completely depleted, but we still want to, look like we have the part. And a lot of women, Lara also talks about that too, like having everything looking good on the outside, but while you're kind of burning alive on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to that? Can you remember what that was like then? Because you had a beautiful home. You had 4 boys. You had this life that looked really beautiful on the outside and together. But can you talk about what it felt like on the inside?
Oh, it felt, I was pretending, because I was not
Yeah.
happy, and, pretending is my trigger. Pretending is my canary in a coal mine now in life. Like that's my warning signal. And it's been such a process because I never said no. Like I used to have this need for people to need me, right? So
Yes.
it's like, oh, you need me? Let me help you. Because then that's where I was getting my worth. And that's where I was getting my, like, I'm valuable. Um, and even if I'm exhausted, even if I'm staying up all night, um, even if inside I'm screaming no, I always say yes. And I lived a long portion of my life like that. And, the cul-de-sac life that I was living, really what I was struggling, and
Yeah.
I had 6 years of recovery, which I don't really write about in the book. I had 6 years, um and then it was 11 months before I was arrested that went away. And and um and partially because my second husband at the time, that's what I found out, he was using. And then that's really hard to be around. And I had 6 years, but it was also very surface level and for show. I was the poster girl of recovery. I was, like I was doing the committees and I was saying the right things and I was sponsoring, but I had never done the inner work. It was all very surface still. And so when I was, it took very little to push me out of that.
It's funny. I was talking to my partner about this recently, and I was like, you can tell people are like, I'm sober, I'm sober. And I was like, but are you in recovery? Right. To your point. And you can tell kind of the ones that do the work. And it's not a judgment, but yes, to your point. And it's because it's the inner work, right? That is why we used and drank and tried to escape ourselves and all those other things.
Yeah.
What's been the hardest inner work for you when you talk about now this time kind of what's been the most challenging? Is there something that you, I mean, I want to go, being in prison is very challenging.
And you want to know the great thing about that, though, that the only one, because it's
I
horrible,
do.
do not recommend it. But the one thing I miss, like, don't recommend it at all. And the one thing I missed is there's only outgoing calls. Like no one can, like for someone who, you know, tends to be introverted sometimes, or I don't even know if I'm an
Yes.
introvert. I've told myself that my whole life, but I might not be. But there is this sort of, there's no incoming. Like it's only if you call someone, can you talk to someone? So there is this sort of peace around that sometimes I miss, right? That's
It's
the
been
only,
nice.
that's the only thing. Yeah. Mm. So I totally forget your question. Did you have a question?
So I did. So let's talk about, I have this maybe a specific moment or kind of time in your life, in your journey, when you felt the most disconnected. Because, and I'm going to leave it at that. I was going to give it,
Okay.
you know, it could be during your using or it could be after, right? And so I think there are times when, particularly, it's hard, like you said earlier, while we're using and drinking and interactive addiction, that we feel disconnected. But you've said this before, you know, it's the hindsight that kind of gives you that perspective. So is there a moment in this journey that you felt the most disconnected?
I think the the you know, the year before I was arrested, I felt the most disconnected from myself. I think the year that I was locked up, I was disconnected from my children and the world, but it allowed me to reconnect with myself. So that was the beginning of a very long journey to connect. I think when I got out is really when I felt the most disconnected because I was in so much shame, which is all about disconnection and isolation. And I was obviously, I felt like I had no community, and the community I lived in didn't like me that much. I was fighting to get my children back and rebuild my life. And, you know, I look back on that now because sometimes they're like, people are like, how did you do that? I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea. And it's just like this one step. Now you're, are you going, but it was this,
Yes, I'm
yeah.
crying.
And
Go
it
ahead.
was just this, like, the idea that some institution could say that I was not Caden's mother was unfathomable to me. And so it was really this drive to do, like, no matter what, no matter, like, okay, I have to be in 3 places at once. I don't know how to do that. You know, it was insane. It's still insane 15 years later. There's still insanity around it. And well, I shouldn't put on mascara today, huh?
I,
I don't know what I was thinking.
like I said, I was crying before I knew I was going to come on because, well, one, your writing is so beautiful. I felt like I was there with you. And when you came out and you talk about, yeah, you have to be at this place and this is across town and you don't have a license and you can't get a license without this and you don't have a job and you have to get on the bus and the bus is late and you miss. And I was like I was there with you and sobbing. And I have a son and I put myself in your shoes and knowing the love that we have for our children and we do anything for them. My heart broke for you.
Yeah.
And
And the stakes are so high because any one
yeah,
of those missed buses ends up with you back in jail.
yes,
It's not like, oh, okay, let me call and say XYZ. The stakes are so high. It's like, I don't know if I put this in the book or got edited out or was in an earlier version, but the way I describe it is like, it's like walking a high wire in high heels in a windstorm every single day. And you're just like this, or that, I think, you know, that when you're tipping back in a chair and you're about to go too far and that like, that's what it was like every minute of every day. It was just this constant, unnecessary stress, right? Because, um, you know, 80% of women in jail are mothers and minor children. 100% of them love their children and desperately want to be with
yeah,
them. And you have counties, you know, you have divisions within the same county, you know, in the county I was in California, where they'll say you have a year to meet all these requirements to get your child back, but also you're sentenced to 18 months in jail. And those two things don't, and it bleeds into the foster care system, and it's just illogical. It's everything is set up to make sure that women especially fail, and yeah, that women fail.
We can have a different conversation about the court system and women offline. But yes, I agree with you. They're not, yes. But what resonated with me, like, one, you talk about literally like the timeline and the logical steps that needed to happen. But something that I felt inside of you, there's also that trauma, right? And that feeling of just what you said. If I don't do this, I might not get my child back. And you're trying to stay sober. Which for people that aren't in recovery know that first year just how, well, I can speak for myself, just how challenging that first year is to change people, places, things, actions, behaviors, feelings, because feelings are those triggers that take us back out. At least for me, feelings were the things that made me want to go back to that, best friend that was trying to kill me, aka alcohol, drugs.
Right.
But you didn't. And that's the part that I think is just so mind-blowing, that you stayed the course and did everything with limited, if any, help.
Yeah. And resources. I sometimes I find it's well, when I walked out of jail, I said, I'm never going back. And I meant that. And two, things were bad enough for me that there was no part of my brain that saw that as an option or a tool, like really clearly. Three, sometimes it's easier to be to maintain, for me, it's easier to not do drugs when I'm in a crisis. Right? Because that crisis is so consuming, right?
Yeah,
sometimes it's like when, things are good. It's like when you're
bored.
For me it is, or restless, but sometimes it's like, I find that there's the coping skills when things are chaotic and in crisis and feel like a disaster, and then there's coping skills when wonderful things are happening and everything's good. And sometimes that can be more unnerving if you've grown up used to that chaos and crisis, right? Like, this is familiar. I know how to manage myself in this.
That's
I know
trauma.
how to, that's the trauma response. But for me, it was my children. I was determined to get them back. I was determined to change the story of our lives, and not that have me going to jail and losing them be the end of the story. That was unacceptable to me. And so I had such a strong mission and purpose and drive and love for them and desperation to get them back, that helped, that helped me, that like single focus purpose helped me, and to not ever go back to jail, because I wrote the funny stories, right? I wrote like a few scenes from jail, and the ones that fit thematically with my book. But again, it's horrible to be a number. It's horrible to be in a place where that is built by men, run by men, where women are 30 times, a woman who's incarcerated is 30 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than a woman walking on the streets of New York City in the middle of the night or anywhere out in the world. And the reality is, it's a very re-traumatizing place to be. Again, do not recommend. It's a great place to learn to meditate. That's also true. But I was determined not to go back. And so that definitely helped me. It's always helped me. I don't even drive a mile over the speed limit now. So I'm like the slowest driver.
I love that. And I want to talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about the work you're doing now, because I think, from pain comes purpose. And one of the things that I've, right from the outside, we talked about, we've been friends for a long time, but this is the first time we've talked, right? One of my observations when I've followed your work. I've read your, read your book, followed your social posts, read your articles, all of this stuff. And what I see in you is a woman that has endured so much. And this resilience has come through in spades. But the one thing I'm the most impressed by when it comes to you is that none of this has jaded you and made you angry. And most people walk through life and would use that as an excuse to be pissed off and irritated. But you took that and you're now making changes in other women's life in such a beautiful, impactful, powerful, and kind, compassionate way.
Thank you.
Can you talk about the work that you're doing with the Gemma Project?
Yeah. So when nonfiction books sell, you have a year to write the book, and then a year before it comes out, you sell from a proposal. And so when that happened, I wrote the draft of the book and went through that. But I also thought to myself, I'm going to have a big microphone for a little bit, right? And I want to do some good with it. And mostly I wasted so many years in shame. I wasted so many years in shame and I didn't, and so many amazing events that I write about in the book. Like I got to meditate with the Dalai Lama in his private residence, but part of me wasn't there because I was still in so much shame and keeping a secret and afraid people would find out about my past. And so still cared so much about other people's opinions of me and judgments and had no self-worth and was trying to prove I was good adjacent enough so that when the truth came out, I had a resume of goodness, still trying to prove my worth and value for way too long. And I didn't want any other woman to have to do that. And the ways in which I didn't know, because again, it's not like in my PTA cul-de-sac life, I did not spend a lot of time thinking about incarcerated women. Right. Like I didn't.
Of course. Why would you?
Right? Why would you? And so I co-founded the Gemma Project, which is Gender and Trauma Responsive Services. I did it with Cynthia Chase, who's former mayor of Santa Cruz, and has been working in the justice system in all aspects. She was a correctional officer, probation, lobbyist, and so we co-founded this and launched it. We worked on it for a good year and a half. Launched it a month before my book came out, and it is, providing programming, in custody programming for women, and then 18 months of reentry services so that people aren't going back to jail or losing their children to foster care because they don't have transportation, right? Or because they don't have a job. The number one predictor that for recidivism for women is poverty. It's not committing a crime again. It's not, it is poverty. And so, I tell this story about, in the prison system, when you get paroled to whatever county. So in LA, they give you if you leave Chowchilla prison, you get a clear plastic bag with your belongings, and they give you a bus ticket. And the women get off the bus in Los Angeles, the bus station, and there is a line of predators looking for those clear plastic bags because women are, it is a signal that they are, a lot of them are desperate for housing, housing, jobs, and so it is so hard if you can't rent a house because you have a criminal background, then you're in the underground housing market. If you can't, where you have no protections, where you're just ripe to be exploited and re-victimized. And if you're desperately trying to be with your children, you're desperate, so, and if you can't get a job, then you fall into old behaviors to survive. And so there's just, it's an overwhelming, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, this is such a big problem. What can I do? But my job, I feel like, is and that's been my journey, is to kind of do what I can to erase the shame and the stigma. So when I see those book clubs in Ohio and they're all dressed up on their book club and sending pictures and they're taking like, what's your jail nickname and what's your mugshot? And here's our commissary book club stacks. Like, I love that because it's destigmatizing, Yeah. Now, some of them are chopping up powdered sugar as a joke, and that's, in the book club things. But again, you know, like, but it's destigmatizing. And I spent so long, so afraid people would find out that I was incarcerated. And I don't want anyone to have to, because it's so isolating, and shame only heals in community. You know, it only heals in community. So
That's two things. There's one, I love this that you said about my biggest, you talk about leaning to the person next to you. I want you to talk about this. And you say, when you try to describe shame, and you talk about it in the book, and I had highlighted it and I wanted to read it verbatim, but I'd love to hear it from you. When you say, imagine shame, when you try to, and you say, okay, think of the worst thing you've ever done. Now turn
right.
to the person to their right and tell them. And people are like, oh,
Yeah.
can you talk to that? Because that is that I highlighted it and screenshot it. And I mentioned you in a speech I did in the book and talked about this is the best description of shame that I've ever could articulate.
Yeah. I asked a group of people to do this. I gave a TEDx talk and I said, okay, close your eyes and now think about the thing.
Yeah.
Think about the worst thing you've ever done, the thing you're ashamed of. You know, and there's a spectrum. It could be like, oh, I cut someone off today, or I did, you know, or I slept with my best friend's husband, like whatever the spectrum is of.
Yeah.
And then and so people thought about it, you know, and then I said, now tell the person. It was like everyone just gasped, like, and I was like, that is how that feels every day. This just like someone's gonna find out, you
Yeah.
know, and like I'm in trouble, you know. I had I still do that. Like people are like, can you get on a conference call? And I'm like, I did this yesterday. Am I in trouble? Like, you know, that automatic thing.
Yes.
Wait, am I in
Yeah.
trouble?
Yes.
But that feeling, and it's so debilitating and isolating. If you're just like always afraid, you know, I could not make friends post jail because,
Yes.
you know, even when I got Caden back and he's in third grade and the mom comes up and says, oh, you know, my son and your son are like best friends. And um, can my son come play at your house? And I'm like, you probably wouldn't want him to if you knew my past, but I'm not going to tell you my past because then you're going to run away from me. And so now I'm going to just say, you know, it's just this distancing and it's
Yeah.
so isolating and lonely. And I had a totally false belief about that, right? I thought if people knew the truth about me, they would run screaming. And then I told the truth about me in my book and the opposite. You know, it like
That's
draws
my
people
question.
closer.
Yeah.
And I guess
The right
people learn
people,
that, yeah,
right?
the right
Like there are probably
people.
some
Yeah.
people that are like,
Oh yeah.
I don't agree with that, or I don't, but the right people that see you for who you are and love you for who you are and appreciate who you are and welcome you with open arms and love the authenticity are like cheering from you for this, I imagine, right? And so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so did that, publishing the book and seeing it in print, did that alleviate some of the shame that you still carried? Or
It
writing it, was that the process?
Writing it helped. I mean, like doing that TEDx talk was really the first baby step
Okay.
because I felt light after. Like when I got on
I
the
get that.
stage and said, here's the thing I'm afraid you're going to find out about me. And it was a feeling of lightness. It was a feeling of what I looked for in drugs, which is joy for no reason, right? Like I was like, oh, this actually feels better than any, like it felt better than any drug I ever took, actually, because it was real. And I was like, oh, there's something to just owning it, you know, because I was the one who, I mean, yes, people were judging me. Yes, people still judge me, but I was judging me the most. Yes, people are unforgiving. Yes, some might be still a little unforgiving, but I was the most unforgiving, you know, like, so
Yeah.
it was this journey. So writing the book, you know, there are things I put in the book, the darkest chapters of the book were not in my proposal. My editor didn't know, my agent didn't know, nobody knew. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to be, I'm only going to do if I can be extra honest. Not because I know how to write, so I could write in a way that I could hustle
Yeah.
honesty if I wanted
Kind
to,
of
you know, a
glaze
little
over
bit.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I could razzle dazzle with the letters. Um, but I was like, I'm going to be really honest. But then, right before the book went into production, my editor said, 3 days, we need another chapter. Because the book started with the arrest, and he goes, we need a chapter of you actually committing your crimes. And I hadn't done that. So that chapter 2 in my book, the staycation chapter,
Yes.
was
Yes.
not part of anything. And it was 3 days before it was going into production. And I said, in my mind, because I wasn't being, I didn't want to actually give a chapter to people of me actually committing crimes, because
Why
I
not?
still had that shame. Like,
Okay.
I'm going to be honest in retrospect, but I wouldn't, but I told
Yeah.
myself, well, it's because the book's in the present tense and I have to start and keep, but really I was so ashamed of that, because it is so not who I am. Like, I
Yeah.
would give you all my, Hilary, you need all my money, here you go. Like, that's
I
who
know.
I am. Like, here, take,
And you
okay,
put
we'll
that in
figure it out.
there. I wouldn't steal from you, but I would, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But so it was so hard. And I had to really look at that and say, okay, I wanted to be honest, but not, he was right to do it. And, I only had to go back a day so I could still present tense it. So that came later. But part of the thing too is the stories in my book of the time in jail, like I had never told them, because one, I wasn't inviting people to ask me, right? Even the people who knew, and even my family, I wasn't talking about it. And that's what shame does. And so I didn't realize until after, like, how much I needed to share those stories. Like, I didn't know that until I had done it. And so I was, it was 3 weeks before the book was coming out, and I had this moment of terror, like, oh no, what have I done? Like it's a dream where you're naked in front of the math class. And I was like, oh, this is bad. This is, it was like a vulnerable shame bomb went off on me, and I was terrified and like felt like, oh, I've overshared. Oh, this is cringe, this is too much. This is, and then I got over it. But it has been healing in a way I didn't know I needed. Just the people who've resonated, and it's helped. And a lot of young women whose parents are incarcerated, or who don't have a successful addiction story. They didn't get to the other side. They're finding a lot of forgiveness and compassion that's helping them.
That's really powerful that you're
Mm-hmm.
giving them that gift. What was the biggest fear when you kind of delivered the book of the shame?
I think the biggest fear, I think it's been a journey to be okay with whatever people think about me, right? And not have to
That's hard. Yeah.
defend myself, and or just the fear was like just the judgment, I think, and that people would run screaming and like away, and or be mad at me, and some of the characters in the book aren't that happy, some of the um but all I could do is tell the truth and own my story. And I think there's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of healing in that. And when I did my book launch in Santa Cruz, 250 people came out from the community, and it was healing as a community in a way I didn't know I needed. Like, it meant so much. Even the paper was like, local favorite, Lara Love Hardin. I was like, when did I become a local favorite? That's cool.
It's
Like,
not it's not what I was reading a year ago, or a couple of years ago, 16 years
yeah.
ago,
And that
15 years
was
ago. Yeah.
pre-Oprah, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
Oh yeah.
yeah, that was before the Oprah thing. So yeah,
It's
so it's
funny
all been
how,
healing, and it's just freeing. It gets lighter and lighter, and it's really
yeah.
helped me become more me than I've ever been.
And you say this, right? So maybe real power is saying things out loud and owning your story like you own a company or a network or a magazine. Real power is putting your name on things. Real power is about using your power to shine a light on other people so they can find their power.
That's good.
I
No.
love Yeah. Do you like that?
Yeah, like that.
It's a quote that I read somewhere.
Sounds wise. I don't know. Yeah.
But I think, to your point, like that whole, because we perpetuate that shame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internally, like you said, I mean, there's the fear of other people not liking us. And so that was my big, when I waited 15 years to share about my recovery journey, because I
Mm-hmm.
was still worried that there was somebody on social media that was going to say something mean, or somebody that wouldn't like me, or I would be judged for it. And in that moment, I'm like, well, those aren't my people. Because what about that woman that has 1 year or 1 day, or is struggling to get sober and can't because she feels it shameful. So I don't have the luxury to stay silent anymore
Right.
when those women are my people, not the person, not owning their stuff, and that's not being authentic, which is okay too, but their opinion means less to me than the woman that's trying to, get help and get sober, and like these women that you're helping that whose parents are incarcerated that didn't get this story. I mean, and yes, and that second you kind of release it, it is an unknown, it's a healing, like anything else, I think, because it's like unlocks that jail of shame, or that thing that just kept you so in the darkness. And I say that like shame hides in the darkness and we recover in the light, and being able to share these stories with other people.
Here's the thing too about when you're in shame, you will never advocate for yourself. Right? So shame, this is what I've realized.
Lara,
right?
That's good. Yeah.
And when you're in when you're in shame, you will not advocate for yourself and have what I call righteous anger, right? Like anger that fuels change. Like shame keeps you, it not only keeps you isolated and small, it keeps you from I could always advocate for others long before I could advocate for myself. And it also, there's no room for creativity if you're in shame, right? There's no room, like those survival things, it's just hiding. And so, it's only now that there's a few things I'm like, oh, that wasn't exactly fair, or, and I'm, right now I'm very angry that I can't go to Canada because I have a criminal record, and I don't know, like I have no plans to go to Canada, but it makes me angry because I'm not going to hurt Canada. And so everyone's like, you're very obsessed with Canada right now. I was like, I know. But the thing, but there was no part, I pled guilty to 32 felonies. A lot of those things I didn't do, and I would have pled guilty to 1,000 felonies and paid back millions of dollars I didn't actually steal to get my children back. But there is a way in which a certain people and parts of, the way in which the world and people expect people to pay forever for this worst version of themselves, right? This worst thing we've done. And, I've never had a violent moment in my life except for throwing a head of iceberg lettuce when I was 16. And there's still people, there's people on the internet who are like, oh, she shouldn't make any money from her book. And I'm like, but why? So I can't put Caden in college, so he pays and then his children pay. Like this is how judgment and yes. These illogical consequences, like as parents, we want logical consequences for kids, right? This happens, so this is the consequence, so you understand the connection. But, me not, Canada's not the right example for this powerful point I'm trying to make this, I'm losing, but like me not being able to send Caden to college is not a logical consequence to, what was wrong. Like I stole my friend's credit card and used it at the grocery store. That was wrong. And I should pay back money and I should pay for my crime.
And you
against law.
It.
And yeah. I did it. And I did all the things, but so and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that kind of stuff, it's really easy to get angry on behalf of other people. And, a comment like that the old me would have sent me running. And now I'm like, no, that's not right. Actually, like I'm done paying. And so that's taken a long time for me to be like, actually, I don't need to pay anymore, regardless of who's saying. I mean, now there's still laws, there's still, things. And I'm in the process of trying to get my record expunged. And my male co-defendant, who had the same exact charges, had this happen years ago. And I've had to write, a letter in why, in the interest of justice, I should, and get 10 letters of recommendation, which is like a horrible triggering thing to have to do. Prove I'm good. I'm having to prove I'm good right now. There might be a hearing, and we had the same exact charges. Mm-hmm. He didn't. He had a different track. Uh-huh. He didn't. And so to me, that's where some anger's coming, some righteous anger. Right. I'm not angry at the world.
I'm sitting next to you with that anger too. All through that, I was like,
yeah,
different conversation. Yeah. Yes,
I'm going to pack your that hearing. Coming. I'm going to bring 2,000 people to that hearing if they make me have a hearing.
I'll come. You let me know when it is, and I will be there.
It'll be in Santa Cruz. So yes, it's a beautiful place to visit. Yeah.
Yeah. Not a bad place. It's not like Minnesota in the winter. Like I will be there. And I love this too, because humor plays a really big role, it seems like, in your book and through this healing process. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means to you? Is that
Yeah,
something you've always had? Is that something kind of now that is?
I've always had it, and I think, sometimes sometimes it's a comfort to see the absurdity in the world, even in the dark things and even in the illogical things, that I've always sort of had that uh, ability to look at the absurd and laugh. And 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 I think like who I am, I don't want to say immature. I'm playful spirit. Like the real me is very like joyful and playful and slightly immature, maybe, or inappropriately will laugh at things. But I find, uh, you can't. It just can't all be heavy, and I think the opposite of trauma is play. Those things are the opposite, play and trauma. And so I didn't play for a long time, like feel playful or feel that when I was like struggling or when I was, before my incarceration and certainly not after. And so it's been a real gift. I went to, there's actually a lot of research about like improv helping people
You
cope with
did
trauma.
that. Yeah.
And I went to
Yeah.
improv, which is terrifying because, I
I
used to be someone
imagine.
like, let me script everything. Then I'll pretend like I'm just making
Yeah.
it up, but let me script it because it's control and careful and I can control what you're going to think and what I'm going to say and try and control the world's reactions to me. And improv is the opposite of that. And not only did I find, a community of like wonderfully creative, weird, misfit people that I fit right in with. But
Yeah.
but that that lack of self-conscious, there's no self-consciousness there, and you're just in the moment. It is the best way to hack mindfulness too, and staying in the moment, which is a great tool to have. And yeah, it was terrifying at first. I was like, oh, what am I doing? But I wanted to do something that terrified me for good, right? When I went to my first class, I was like, I want to do this. This is crazy. Um, but yeah, it's a real fun, and I found my first community there because they were the first ones where I kind of told my past and to gauge the reaction. And they were like, okay, you want to go? Cool. Do you want to go to lunch? Like it was such a
Yeah.
non-issue and really have been a big, huge support. And my 2024 came in hot and hard and with a lot of hard things, like, and good things in the first few weeks. And I had this moment where I was like, what is different? Like my father passed away on January 1st. And it's a whole new father I got 7 years ago. So I didn't even put any of this in the book because it was too unbelievable. And so I got, and then my third time's a charm husband left and fell in love with someone else. And then Oprah popped up the next week. So this all happened in the first 3 weeks of 2024. So I've just written a bonus chapter for the paperback version. Simon Schuster asked me to do that. Which will come out in February. But so all of these things are happening. And I was like, wait, it was like February. And I'm in the Oprah machine madness preparing content, which is wonderful. Like I made that happen in my mind, so this is like my dream come true. And I was like, why am I okay? Like I had to stop and I was like, wait, why am I okay? Because I've gone through death and betrayal. My first marriage, that's what led me to opiates. I've gone through hard things before. And I was like, what is different? And I was like, oh, I've always gone through them alone. And I'm not this time. I've always internalized it and made it like about me. There's something wrong with me. I'm not this time. And without even realizing it, that I've created this community where, 8 days in a row, I was doing stuff without realizing it. My friends are like, oh, hey, do you want to go to a rage room? Well, that I knew that was very fun. A rage room where you smash things. Highly recommend that.
Did you do that?
It was so
Do
much
you and
fun.
you recommend it? I said that
I
to a
highly
girlfriend.
recommend.
Yeah.
And the woman who
Okay.
runs it
Okay.
at the end, she said, ladies, when we walked out, she said, ladies, I want to thank you for choosing violence tonight. And it was like my favorite moment
The
because
one
you're
acceptable
smashing things
time.
one
Yeah.
acceptable time. But I was like, oh, they've just shown up and I've shared how I'm feeling and I've taken direction. I've asked for help and I've said, when my dad passed away, I was in baggage claim in Key West and I called a friend and she's like, here's what you're going to do. And I was like, okay, I can't deal with this. You know, I called my oldest son. Can you tell people? Like the old me would have been like, I have this, I can handle everything. And I was like, oh no, I need people. And that's the, you know, that's a whole different story, you know? And so that's when I was like, oh, I actually, because you never know, you know, the subtitle of my book is a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing, but you really don't know the healing until you're tested and you see how you cope.
I love that. Um, and I think one that's the power of community too. But like you in 2022, I had that similar. I finalized my divorce, moved, launched a business, and then lost my dad. So
Mm.
4 of the top 5 things, and I just started sharing about my recovery, and so I was like,
Oh,
oh my gosh. Like everything kind of my whole entire world upended, you know, and so I feel that. But you're right.
yeah.
It's the asking
Yeah.
for help is hard, but it's so helpful.
It's
Right.
also, I also had to realize, like, you know, I used to need to be needed, but I'm also, so I don't have that as much, but I'm a help, like, I like to help. Like, that feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was like the people who cared about me, I was denying them the gift of helping, right? Like there's
Yes.
something about that,
Yes.
like they feel good too. And you know, yeah, I'm also my house is for sale, right? I've had to sell my house. I've had it, you know, like I'm you know, I'm actually at someone's house in San Francisco right now that I met at a book, a Stanford professor at a book event. She's like, "Oh, here, your house is getting staged, and you have to get out. Come stay at my house." You know, so like community, like the community, my community is growing, and I have zero look good. That was the other thing I realized with this. Like I have zero, oh no, I just wrote this book where like here's my happy home that no, I said in the book, no, I wrote in the book like it can never be taken away from me, you know. And here's my third time's the charm, perfect marriage, and here's this love story. And you know, I had all these neat, happy endings in the memoir at the end. And then I was like, oh, here's life showing up. But I had zero look good about it. Like, oh, I have to pretend everything's great. You know, let me go on podcasts and say, yeah, it's all happily ever after. It's not real life. Life will always keep on lifing, right? And so it's really been a gift to see for real how I've changed and how I deal with life when life's hard at you, right? Which I'm sure you're realizing too when you're going through all the same things.
And you realize that this is my experience, the people that are the biggest kind of, I don't say haters, but are the ones that do want that superficial, everything is perfect. Everything is, you can't be doing that great because it's, you know, you can't just
Yeah.
be, and you're like, no, this is it. I don't need to look good to just be who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So to that end, I would love for you to share your 3, I mean, I was going to say there's been a roller coaster, but and this is what I see when I see you, and I really meant that you just have this beautiful presence of acceptance and authenticity of who you are, and I think that is one of the most beautiful characteristics that a human can have, and to own everything and share it with others and say, this is who I am, and I'm showing up messy and real and just owning it, and like it or not, right? I love
Mm-hmm.
that. So I would love for you to share 3 things, whether it's a quote or a tool or a funny story of how you've navigated all of this. And that's a big question, but are there 3 things that come to mind that are like your go-tos or something that helped you in a moment of challenge that you can recall? Or, you know, if there's a woman that's struggling, what's one thing that's always helped you, you know, asking for help community, something like that,
Yeah,
that you can share?
I think the biggest thing is not thinking that I have to handle everything on my own anymore, right? And part of that is just allowing myself to be as human as I allow other people to be, right? So for me now, the difference between the old me and the new me is if I have a feeling now and I'm like, oh, I'm having a big feeling, I'll call like 27 people. Like if I get your number, I'll call you and be like, I'm feeling confused. I'm feeling scared. Like you know,
I
like
love that.
the bravest thing I can do is tell people how I'm really feeling. Like that is a big change, like that is, I'm not afraid to be that messy person. I'm not, but really it's just, I have people now, I have people that I've actually let in for real. And those people weren't necessarily like who I was hanging out with at PTA and carpool and little league and book club. And some of them are, one or two are, but it's really the people who know the worst things, the worst version of me, and love me anyway. And that's all we want. That's all I've ever wanted, right? Like, let me tell you the secret fears I have. And then they lessen, And so I think my biggest thing is that I have community and people, and that's who to celebrate with in wonderfully joyous times, like when the Oprah thing got announced, I had a living room full of people celebrating. And when I'm, going through like divorce and death, death, divorce, and Oprah is what I call the first 3 weeks of January, right? I have people who are there when I'm like, I'm like, I feel very unsettled right now because I'm not sure where I'm going to live. 1 minute I'm like, I'm moving to Hawaii. I'm moving back to, like, I don't know where I'm going to live next. And that just would terrify me and send me spiraling. And so I just tell people when I'm like, this is really unsettling. And I have people who check on me and I answer the phone and I say, don't worry. I know you're checking on me. And when it is time to worry, I tell them the things, and what I found is like everybody has secrets. So many people have messaged me with their secrets because it's a gift when you share your secrets,
Yeah.
and nobody's getting through life easy. Everybody's struggling with something. And so I just think that the greatest tool, the best thing is like, don't struggle alone. I mean, don't overshare with the woman at the grocery store all your things, but find your people, like don't like
It's creating a safe space, right? Like a safe space with other women or your therapist or coach or just somebody that you can pick
yeah,
up the phone and say, hey, I just did X, Y, and Z. And they're like, okay, do you want to talk about it or do you want my
yeah,
feedback? Or, just somebody that's
yeah,
going to love you completely as you
yeah.
are. And
And I would say
that's,
my second top thing is that I don't pretend. I actually don't
okay, I
say
love
no,
that.
yes when I mean no. I don't say
Yeah,
I'm okay when I'm not. I don't say
that's
everything's
hard.
fine. It's so hard,
That's hard.
but it's so much less exhausting than the alternative, right? Like, and that is my, that is, my canary in a coal mine. If I start pretending in everything in my life, anywhere in my life, I'm like, ooh, that's a warning sign for me for my addiction, right? Like that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to think like, oh, maybe I can recreationally smoke heroin. Like I'm not going to think that, I'm going to be like, everything's fine. No, Hilary, life is wonderful. It's all great. I'm going to Stepford wife myself through
Yeah.
life, right? And start playing a role again rather than just being me.
Yes. And that can get, for myself, that can get me in trouble too. Because if I start pretending everything is fine and then I slowly start to become someone I'm not, and that someone I'm not can easily go back very
Yeah,
quickly too. Yes.
yeah.
So kind of owning our stuff. I love that.
Hmm.
I love this. Lara, thank you.
Thank you.
I could talk to you all day. And I'm
I know.
like very conscious. So one last thing, tell us where we can find you. Where can people find out about the Gemma Project? Do you have any new books that we can find out? Where can we find out all information about you, social media, website, all the good stuff?
So, unfortunately for Caden, who says I should not be on social media and I'm cringe, my Instagram is
I love your
at,
social.
at Lara Love Hardin. Caden's like, Mom, come on. Um, and
It's
so
such a good mix of like personal and professional. I
yeah,
love it, but
yeah,
maybe
I love
Caden's
it.
not your audience.
Yeah, yeah.
He's
I mean, he loves it too. He's all my
yes, I
boys are
know.
super proud, and he loves it. And my oldest son's getting married in a week and a half, so that's our next
The second
big
one this
thing.
year, right?
Yeah, 2
Is
weddings
that
this
right?
year. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fun because
Congratulations.
everybody in my book is at these weddings, so that's a whole story. That's it. So I have my paperback comes out February 4th, and there is a bonus chapter that takes place in this year in that book. And then I'm working on a novel next because that's my next goal. And then the Gemma Project is thegemaproject.org. I'm going next week back to Chowchilla Prison. I went there with Oprah about a month and a half ago to do book club with 150 women. And it's the first hardback they've allowed in there. And I'm going back there August 23rd to do book club with the other 2,000 women who are in the largest women's prison in California. So yeah, we're really, we're excited about expanding Gemma across the country and just we're creating curriculum and a model that could just be replicated county by county, state by state. So we're really excited about that. And yeah, just writing and working and momming and doing all the things. Yeah.
All the things. Well, when you come to DC, let us know. Let me know.
I will.
Gemma Project. I love that you advocate for women who maybe can't speak for themselves or just don't know how. And so I acknowledge that in you, and I love all the work you're doing. And I'm truly honored to have this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.